Welcome. I'm Nan Stout. I'll be guiding you through the training today. The main goal of this training is to help you feel prepared. By the end of this session, you should be able to explain what RISE is, give examples of do's and don'ts under the Events Code of Conduct, and finally, describe your role, especially what to do if you receive or learn about a complaint or concern at a GSA meeting. RISE stands for Respectful, Inclusive, Scientific Events. This slide shows a picture of a pin that all RISE liaisons wear at our meetings. We use RISE to bring our Events Code of Conduct to life and foster the kind of positive culture we aim for at GSA, one of respect and inclusion. Today we'll focus on 4 areas: GSA's Events Code of Conduct, how we promote awareness of RISE at GSA meetings, your role, and finally, next steps and additional resources. Here's some context before we dig into the Events Code of Conduct. The purple bars on this chart show all of the Events Code of Conduct complaints and concerns that have been filed since 2017. The yellowy orange bars show complaints and concerns filed under the Code of Ethics, which was implemented in 2019 and applies to GSA members. Our evidence shows that the code is really working. So far, we've had 15 formal complaints under both of these policies, 7 of which have resulted in findings of violations. Of those violations, we've taken steps to ban certain individuals from meetings for a period of several years, and we have also terminated some members and terminated their fellowship status for violating the Member Code of Ethics. The Events Code of Conduct applies to everybody who attends GSA meetings, whether they're in person or online. The code includes 3 main parts: do's and don'ts, ways to report concerns, and consequences for violations. This slide shows some examples of the kind of behaviors GSA encourages to foster a culture of respect and inclusion. Show respect and consideration, listen and make room for a diversity of voices, be collegial and collaborative, communicate openly, critique ideas, not individuals, and show that you value different perspectives. These behaviors have no place at any GSA events. Do not intentionally talk over others or dominate discussions. Do not make biased, demeaning, harassing, or threatening comments. Do not call out or exclude people based on identity or appearance. Do not display nudity or sexual images, and do not touch or make sexual advances unless you know the conduct is welcome. These are just a few excerpts from our Events Code of Conduct, and I highly encourage you to read the whole thing. Let's take a look at how GSA promotes RISE at GSA meetings. Firstly, we have a RISE office. This is a physical office location, usually in the convention center in a somewhat remote part of the building, so that participants have a safe and confidential place to ask questions and voice concerns. Participants can just show up at the RISE office, or they can make an appointment by contacting the ethics office. GSA tries to make RISE super visible at our events. We use posters like the one you see here. We also incorporate this slide in every technical session to remind all participants that everyone has a role to play in making our events respectful and inclusive. GSA also promotes RISE awareness through session chair guidelines and training. Session chairs are in a highly visible, privileged position and can make or break the success of GSA sessions. We've developed resources, guidelines, and training that help session chairs not only lead great sessions, but also find ways to weave RISE principles into the technical sessions they're leading. Now let's talk about your role. You have 3 main responsibilities. Be visible, so you're easy to find as a resource. Be alert and approachable. You're there to help GSA spot concerns as soon as possible. Number 3, notify GSA's ethics office if you receive a complaint or you see something inappropriate so we can follow up. You may be wondering what kinds of issues come up at GSA meetings and how they come to you as RISE liaisons. I've pulled together a few examples to give you a better feel for this. They're all based on real cases. First, you'll be wearing a RISE button or pin at the meeting, so some individuals may see that and come up to you to share what happened to them. Sometimes you may learn about potentially inappropriate conduct just by being at the meeting. You may walk through the poster hall or network throughout the meeting and overhear inappropriate comments, like the microaggression listed here. Similarly, you may hear rumors about comments or conduct that seem to violate our events code of conduct. Being visible is one of your most important jobs. You can do that by wearing a RISE pin at GSA events. We will be handing them out to everyone who's been trained. Secondly, if you're attending an online event, add the word RISE in front of your first name when you go into your profile page. So for example, my name would show up as RISE Nan Stout. That lets everybody see in chat rooms and Q&A sessions and the like that you're a RISE liaison. We also ask that you be alert and approachable. As we saw in some of the examples, some people will come to you simply because they see you wearing a RISE pin. Others may not. So if you're alert, now that you know about the events code of conduct, if you see something that doesn't seem right, you serve as an early warning mechanism so GSA can find out early on about potential issues. You're not alone in this endeavor. We're here to back you up. Ultimately, it's the ethics office's job to investigate, but you're there to help participants feel supported and help us learn about potential problems as early as possible. Finally, if you do receive a complaint, you see something that doesn't seem right, let the ethics office know as soon as possible. We investigate every complaint and concern so we can take appropriate follow-up action. There are two easy ways to notify the ethics office. One is to send an email to ethics@geosociety.org. If it's an in-person meeting, you can also just stop by the RISE office. Before we turn to a couple scenarios you might face, I wanted to share some general tips for handling complaints and concerns. First of all, keep in mind that every single situation is different and there's no one right way to do things. As a general matter, your job is to capture the gist of what happened so that you can pass information on to the ethics office, which ultimately is responsible for doing a full-fledged investigation. So when you talk to the reporter, try to find a quiet place to talk so you can keep your discussion as confidential as possible. And remember that they're probably stressed out and anxious about the situation. So being kind and compassionate will go a long way toward making the reporter feel safe explaining what happened in their own words. And when you're capturing information, there's no special form you need to fill out. Your job is to try to capture basic information, who, what, when, where, so that you can pass the information along to the ethics office. So in some cases, you may have names of people. If not, try to write down their badge number or make a mental note of what they looked like so that you can actually share this information with the ethics office. Let's say someone sees your RISE pin and comes up to you to report a problem. What should you do? Number one, it's really important to find a quiet place to talk. I would suggest telling the person, I really want to hear what you have to say. Let's find a quiet place to talk so we can keep this as confidential as possible. Then I would look for a corner, an empty room, anywhere where other folks can't overhear your conversation. Once you've found that quiet place, next, I would explain your role and the basic process GSA will follow. Very briefly, you could explain that as a RISE liaison, your job is to gather basic information about the facts so that you can then pass it on to the ethics office, who will do a full-fledged investigation to find out if there are any violations of the event's code of conduct. If there are, you can also share that it's GSA's practice to take steps to enforce the code up to and including asking someone to leave our meeting. Once you've explained the basic process, then your information gathering responsibilities kick in. It's a good rule of thumb to ask open-ended questions like, tell me what happened, explain what happened in your own words. Any sort of questions that can't be answered with a yes or no will help you pull out basic information about who was involved, what happened, when did it happen, and where did it happen. If you're not able to get the names of people, try to capture what you can about, descriptions, for example, badge numbers, things like that, that will help the ethics office follow up. Once you've gathered all that information, the next step is to notify the ethics office using the methods we've described before. Now, there may be situations where someone finds you, they start getting into a description of the problem, and either you or they don't feel comfortable moving forward. You can always serve as a go-between to either take the person to the RISE office at the GSA event or give them information to help them feel comfortable going to the RISE office themselves. But the most important thing is to let the person know that GSA really cares what they have to say, and we want to gather the gist of it so that we can follow up and make sure we're taking appropriate steps to keep the meeting safe and enforce our events code. What if you're at a meeting and you see or hear something that seems inappropriate? What should you do then? Well, it really depends whether or not you have a chance to speak to someone to find out what happened. If you do, you're basically going to follow the same steps we just spoke about before. You're going to find a quiet place, explain your role in the basic process, then you're going to gather information about who, what, when, and where, and finally you're going to notify the ethics office. But there may be situations where you see or hear things that don't seem right and you don't have a chance to speak with anyone. In that kind of situation, please just notify the ethics office what you know. So again, think about who, what, when, and where to capture as much information as you can, and either physically go to the RISE office or send an email to ethics@geosociety.org. Chances are the ethics office is going to want to follow up with you to fill in any holes so that we can then figure out how to investigate the situation. What about online meetings? Fortunately, GSA has not run into any major problems with our online meetings, but it is possible that someone could post inappropriate comments in the chat or Q&A. If that happens, and you think the comments seem problematic, most likely other people do too, so trust your instincts on this. But the best thing you can do is post a reminder along the lines of, remember RISE, let's make this a respectful, inclusive meeting. Usually that will put everyone on notice of the kind of conduct we expect, and it will stop any further problems from developing. Please don't delve into the substance, just post the reminder, and usually it will nip the problem in the bud. Then what I would do is send an email to ethics@geosociety.org after the session so that we can determine whether follow-up is needed. If you happen to see a really blatant, egregious, very clear, unequivocal violation of the event's code of conduct, please post the reminder, but also try to get a hold of either the meetings department or the ethics at geosociety.org as soon as possible, so that we can take really quick action to make sure the session is safe. Usually that won't be necessary and the reminder will be enough. Now that you've completed this training, the next step is to fill out a verification form so we know who is eligible for RISE pins. You can find the form on GSA's ethics homepage. To get there, go to GSA's main website, click on About, then click Ethics. Alternatively, you can just email ethics@geosociety.org. We'll have RISE pins at the meeting. Check in with the registration desk or contact ethics at the number provided. This presentation focuses narrowly on your role at GSA meetings. It doesn't go into depth about bystander intervention strategies or how to be an effective ally. I highly recommend that you check out Advanced Geo Partnership. They have a website shown here, or just Google Advanced Geo, and you can find a plethora of resources that might be helpful if you want to learn more about this particular area. So much for listening to this presentation. I really appreciate your stepping up to serve as a RISE liaison. It makes a huge difference to GSA and the many participants who come to our meetings. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Please contact ethics@geosociety.org. Thanks again.